A great player experience is at the forefront of a developer's mind, whether that's because they want you to stick around for a sequel, spend your hard-earned money on sweet microtransactions, or simply because they've made an excellent product they want you to enjoy. However, some developers think enjoyment is not enough and want to take players outside of their comfort zone. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that messed with the player. Number 10. Superliminal. Some games are made with the single intention of messing with you as much as possible. Superliminal is one such game. It's often obscure puzzles and perspective-shifting mechanics making you question what is real. The premise of the game is simple, with the player making their way through a dream therapy program using forced perspective as a means of resizing objects to one's advantage. The puzzles that resizing these objects help you solve get increasingly more confusing though, and even the opening of the game tries its hardest to mislead the player, tricking you into signing the terms of service with a click of a button when normal games tell you that such a button press would pick the document up. The signing of the terms of service sets the events of the game into motion, which the character, and indeed the player, mistakenly agree to. The game doesn't stop there though, presenting you with tons more perspective changes and giving you a headache with its many rooms of well thought out and often elaborate scenarios. You can make ramps out of cheese though, so there's that. Number 9. Spec Ops The Line. In a time where the video game industry was oversaturated with generic shooters, you'd be forgiven for thinking that 2012's Spec Ops The Line was just another war game. Quite the surprise then when not only was it excellent, it took players on an uncomfortable journey that they hadn't been on with a shooter before. Throughout the early part of the game, players kill enemies one after another like they have done in so many titles previously. Gradually though, it becomes clear that all is not well with protagonist Martin Walker and by extension the player, who has killed scores of enemies without thinking twice. This comes to a head around the midpoint, with Walker mistakenly killing a huge amount of innocent people with white phosphorus, leading him to losing control of his sanity, empathy and grasp of reality. It also comes as a shock to the player, making them question their actions up until this point and bringing the realization that killing in video games and playing the hero of the story are not always compatible. Who says games can't teach you things? Number 8. Control. A story usually has 3 distinct parts, a beginning, a middle and an end. This is typically clear cut because the story never carries on after the end credits, does it? Well, yes, actually, granted there are many examples of this in various forms of media, but Control does it particularly effectively. You play as Jesse Fadden, director of the Federal Bureau of Control, tasked with, among other things, ridding the Bureau of a supernatural entity known as the Hiss that has been possessing the staff. Towards the end of the game, Jesse is infected with the Hiss, and before the player can even process this, the game cuts to the credits, painting a bleak picture of her fate. Whilst this looks like a dark and depressing end, and certainly not what players expected, this is not the whole story. The credits warp and distort, and the words themselves change from the names of the Remedy team members to nonsensical sentences. The game resumes shortly after this, with Jessie able to rid herself of the Hiss through the actions of the player. Post-credits scene, eh? It'll never catch on. Number 7. Batman Arkham Asylum. A Batman game is not one many would assume would contain a moment that messes with and indeed scares most players, but many would be wrong. Sure, Rocksteady's Batman Arkham Asylum is for the most part a straightforward yet brilliant action game, but for a few seconds it becomes a terrifying experience. Partway through the story, you encounter the Scarecrow, who subjects you to his hallucinogenic agent known as fear toxin. This causes Batman to start hearing voices, and upon walking halfway down a corridor, the game freezes, the screen tears as if crashing, and voices become distorted. After a few seconds of this, the screen goes black, with many players convinced that their console or PC was breaking. Not so though, as a few short moments later comes a cutscene revealing that the glitch wasn't real, with Batman imagining the Joker taking him to Arkham Asylum, his worst fear. And calming down from the fright of a crashed system, the player realises they had their worst fear shown to them as well. Number 6. Gone Home. Many of the entries on this list share a theme of expectation subversion, and none convey that more clearly than 2013's Gone Home. The expectation in question is that it's a horror game, with many textbook horror tropes ticked off. A lone woman, Katie, returns to her family home from overseas to find everyone missing, with a note telling Katie not to investigate. The game sees you explore the home, a classic dark and spooky mansion, in search of answers. The title is very atmospheric, and you will always expect a jump scare or outright horror visuals, but such things don't ever happen. The tension is felt throughout the entirety of Gone Home's runtime until you find the surprisingly tame answer, namely a vacation for Katie's parents and her sister Sam deciding to start a new life with her girlfriend after struggling with her parents about her sexuality. Gone Home was praised for its well-written story and LGBT representation, and was ultimately far less of a horror experience than it first appeared. Number 5. The Secret of Monkey Island. If there was ever a game whose developer had their heart set on messing with players, The Secret of Monkey Island is that game, and LucasArts is that developer. One of the most iconic point-and-click adventure games, the 1990 title is rife with obscure and ridiculous solutions to puzzles, tons of backtracking, and many fourth wall breaks. This old-school trolling largely gets a free pass due to its sheer charm and feelings of nostalgia, though one moment in particular tests the patience of many players. Protagonist Guybrush Threepwood finds himself atop a cliff at a certain point in the story, and if the player moves Threepwood towards the edge, the rock crumbles and he falls. The player is immediately presented with a Sierra-style game over screen explaining that they would have to start over and that hopefully the player has saved the game. Guybrush bounces up the cliff after a few more moments, however, commenting on the fact that a rubber tree had saved him. Not enough to save the player from the panic they just endured, though. Number 4. The Stanley Parable. One of the more interesting games on this list, The Stanley Parable is designed to confuse and frustrate its audience. Initially released in 2013, the game lets players control the titular character of Stanley as he explores what has happened to his colleagues who have mysteriously vanished from his office. The game gives absolute freedom to its players through the use of a narrator giving instructions to Stanley which the player can obey or ignore. Doing either can lead to unexpected results, with the narrator commenting directly on actions taken through fourth wall breaks and attempting to lead the player down certain paths. Looping rooms and infinite corridors can make the player second guess themselves, and the short runtime coupled with multiple endings can also confuse players as they retrace their steps looking for one elusive alternate ending amongst the many. Staying inside your cubicle is also a valid choice and might be a sensible one if you want to avoid the madness waiting for you when you step foot outside of it. Number 3. The Last of Us. How far should a person go to protect their loved ones? Like Spec Ops The Line, 2013's The Last of Us sought to tackle some darker subject matter. Throughout the game, protagonists Joel and Ellie fight multiple people infected with the cordyceps virus as they attempt to get Ellie to the Fireflies, a militia group wanting to utilise her immunity to the infection in search for a cure. After the Fireflies get a hold of Ellie and contain her within St. Mary's Hospital, it becomes apparent that she will be killed in order for her to be used in the making of said cure, something that Joel is quite keen to avoid. Storming into the operating room at the end of the game, players have to kill the main surgeon, but can optionally kill the remaining unarmed surgeons in the room before carrying an unconscious Ellie away. Regardless of your decision here, the bloodshed is made far worse by the revelation that Joel lies to Ellie later about the events that take place in the hospital, suggesting that the Fireflies weren't able to make a cure and stopped trying. The lie reinforces the unease that the player is made to feel about the events leading up to that moment, some of which can be made worse by the player's own freedom of choice. Number 2. Metal Gear Solid. It wouldn't be a list about messing with players without mentioning a Hideo Kojima game. There are many instances in this PS1 masterpiece of the famous auteur having a bit of a laugh at your expense, from Psycho Mantis reading the contents of your memory card to various other fourth wall breaking comments made by characters in the original Metal Gear Solid. Arguably the most famous example was the solution to opening the cargo bay doors, wherein Campbell would ask Solid Snake to contact a number found on the back of the CD case. Many players at that time didn't realise he meant the actual physical case that the game came in and were frantically searching items in their inventory to no avail. Turns out the physical case had a screenshot of the digits on the back, and it remains one of the most ingenious examples of a game giving its audience the runaround. It probably also caused problems for those that were pirating Metal Gear Solid as well, another bonus troll from Kojima. Number 1. Bioshock. This game may be featured in lists far and wide, but we couldn't leave it out of this one. You probably know the story by now, but for those of you who don't, Bioshock follows protagonist Jack as he attempts to escape Rapture, an underwater utopia that has seen rapid decline due to Adam, a genetic substance that grants supernatural powers. As Jack, the player fights various enemies with the help of Atlas, a revolutionary who needs help to stop Ryan, the brains behind Rapture, from killing his family. It's ultimately revealed that you are in fact Ryan's son, and that Atlas is the true enemy, directing your behaviour and that of the player through repeated use of a hypnotic trigger phrase, "Would you kindly?" The realisation that this phrase has been spoken multiple times throughout the game and that you have been mind-controlled represents one of the biggest and most famous twists in gaming, and makes you question every decision you think you made during the title. It's one that stays with you long after it's finished and may well give you trust issues long into the future. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Did any of these games mess with your head? And of course, let us know of any others that we missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.